8 years of grief will change a man in ways he doesn't notice until something forces him to look in a mirror he wasn't expecting. My name is Bob Stephen. I'm 52 years old, I'm a civil engineer, and I've spent the last 8 years of my life attending to the parents of a woman who died on a cruise ship in the Caribbean on a Saturday afternoon in March, 14 years into our marriage. I have driven Walt Pearson to his cardiology appointments every other month. I have sat with June Pearson through 2 hip replacements and a bout of pneumonia that had us all holding our breath for a week. I have mowed their lawn in the Adena summers and shoveled their driveway in the Minneapolis winters and shown up for every birthday and holiday and ordinary Wednesday that required a presence. Because Walt and June lost their daughter, and I lost my wife, and we were each other's remaining proof that Laura Stephen had been real. I did this without resentment. I want to be clear about that. I did it because it was right, and because I loved those 2 people independent of the woman who connected us, and because grief, when you share it with people who are sharing it back, becomes something that is almost not bearable. That's too strong. Almost navigable. That was my life. Linden Hills, Minneapolis, the house on Lake Harriet Boulevard that Laura and I had picked out together, and that I had not sold because the selling of it felt for a long time like a second death. And then I went to Florence on a work project in June, and everything I thought I knew about the last 8 years came apart at a fountain in the Oltrarno neighborhood on a Monday afternoon. Monday, June 9th, 2:15 p.m., Florence, Italy. I had been in Florence for 4 hours. The project, a structural assessment for an American firm partnering with a Florentine developer on a restoration build, had brought Phil Norris and me over for a 10-day engagement. Phil is my colleague of 12 years, a good engineer and a better travel companion, the kind of man who finds the best local restaurant in any city within 48 hours of landing. We'd checked into a hotel on the south side of the Arno, dropped our bags and walked through the Oltrarno neighborhood toward Piazza Santo Spirito, because Phil had read something about it, and Phil's restaurant intelligence is never wrong. The piazza is a wide, irregular square, with a fountain in the center and a basilica on one end, and cafe tables spreading out from the surrounding buildings in the way of Italian public spaces that have been in continuous use for centuries. It was afternoon, warm, the particular golden quality of Tuscan June light that makes everything look like it's been slightly enhanced by someone who knows what they're doing. I was not looking for anything. I was looking at the architecture, occupational habit, genuine interest, the specific way the buildings around the piazza sat in relationship to each other. I had a coffee in my hand. Phil was 3 steps ahead talking about dinner, and then a woman came out of a cafe on the western edge of the piazza with 3 small children, 6 years old or so, all 3 of them, 2 girls and a boy, and a man in his early 50s who had the easy confidence of someone on familiar ground. The woman was laughing. The children were pulling in 3 directions. The man was paying the cafe tab with the resigned patience of a father who has done this 1,000 times. The woman turned to gather one of the children. I dropped my coffee. Not metaphorically. Literally. The cup hit the cobblestones and broke, and the coffee went everywhere, and Phil turned around to see what happened and found me standing completely still with both hands empty, staring across a Florentine piazza at a woman who had the face of my dead wife. Laura, my brain said. Impossible. My brain also said. Laura, it said again, considerably louder. Phil was beside me. Bob. What? Are you okay? What happened? I couldn't answer. I was watching the woman. She was moving away now, across the piazza, one child's hand in hers and the man steering the other, 2 with the practiced ease of parental traffic management. Her hair was shorter than Laura's had been, a dark bob where Laura had kept hers longer. But the way she moved, the line of her shoulders, the specific angle of her head when she laughed. Bob. Phil touched my arm. You're white. What is it? That woman, I said. My voice came out strange. Across the square, the one with the children? Phil looked. The one with the dark hair? He knew about Laura. He'd been at the memorial service. Bob, grief does things too. I know what grief does. I was already moving. I know what it does, and this isn't that. I moved across the piazza, not running. I'm a 52-year-old engineer in dress shoes on cobblestones. Running was not happening, but walking fast, trying to close the distance without making the situation whatever it would become if I caught up with a stranger in a foreign city and told her she had a dead woman's face. They turned left out of the piazza onto a narrow side street. I turned after them. I kept my distance 30 feet more or less, and watched. The man was talking to one of the girls, pointing at something on a building. The woman stopped to help the boy with his shoe. When she bent down, the angle of her neck, the way her hands moved, the specific impatience in the gesture that I had watched 1,000 times across a kitchen table in Linden Hills, Minneapolis. It's not possible, I thought. She died. The cruise line confirmed it. The death certificate exists. You filed it. Donna Hicks used it to close the estate. And yet here is a woman with your wife's face, bending over a child's shoe in Florence, Italy, on a Monday afternoon in June. I stopped walking, let them get further ahead, watched until they turned a corner and were gone. Stood in the narrow street. I didn't know it yet. Didn't know what I was going to find. Didn't know how long this had been happening. Didn't know what the next 10 days were going to require of me. I didn't know yet what it was going to feel like to walk back into Walt and June Pearson's house in Edina, Minnesota, with what I was about to learn. I pulled out my phone, took 2 photos before they turned the corner. Distant, imperfect, but something. Then I called Carl Briggs in Minneapolis. Carl answered on the second ring. "Bob, how's Florence?" "Carl." I looked at the corner where they'd disappeared. "I need you to find me a private investigator. Someone who works international. Italy specifically if possible." A pause. "Bob, what happened?" "I saw a woman," I said. She looked exactly like Laura. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a best friend who was deciding very quickly whether to say the practical thing or the human thing first. "Are you sure?" he asked. "That's why I need the investigator." Back at the hotel, Phil sat across from me at the small table in my room while I pulled up the 2 photographs on my phone. Distant, yes. Imperfect, yes. But the profile was clear enough in the second one, the woman looking sideways at something, half turned, the left side of her face visible. Phil looked at the photo for a long time. "Bob, say it. That is, there's a resemblance. I won't pretend there isn't." He set the phone down. "But you know this isn't. She's been gone 8 years. The cruise line confirmed she went overboard in rough water." I finished. "Yes, I know what they confirmed. I have the documentation. So I'm going to find out who that woman is." I picked up the phone, and then I'm going to make a decision based on information instead of assumption. That's what I do. I'm an engineer. Phil looked at me for a long moment. "And if it's not her?" Then I apologize to a stranger from a distance and go back to doing structural assessments. "And if it is?" I looked at my colleague. 12 years. He knew me well enough to know that I was not a man who fell apart, and also that I was not a man who let things go when the math didn't add up. "Then," I said, "we are going to have a significantly more complicated 10 days than either of us planned for. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong." Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You are going to want to be here for what comes next. Carl called back at 8 p.m. Florence time, noon in Minneapolis, with a name. Sal Mento, retired American investigator, 28 years with a Chicago firm, now operating out of Florence for the past 6 years, working for American and European clients on exactly the kind of cross-border personal investigation that my situation required. I called Sal Mento at 8:15. He answered in English immediately, the English of a Chicago native who has been speaking Italian for 6 years and has learned to code switch in the first syllable. "Mr. Stephen." Carl Briggs called ahead. "Tell me what you have." I told him. The piazza, the woman, the children, the man, the 2 photographs which I texted him while we were still on the phone. A pause while he looked at them. "The man is Marco Ferretti," Sal said. "I recognize him from the photos. He's a logistics businessman, operates out of Florence, Florentine family. Has a villa in the Fiesole Hills above the city, well regarded locally. No criminal history that I know of. And the woman? His wife. Been together about 6 years by local account. 3 children, triplets, conceived via IVF, according to what circulates in the neighborhood. She goes by the name Elena Ferretti. Elena, not Laura. But the face in my 2 photographs. Can you confirm her background? Where she's from? Her history before Ferretti? I'll have something for you. I'll pay whatever the rate is." I know you will, Sal said. Carl vouched for you. Get some sleep, Mr. Stephen. You sound like a man who needs it. I didn't sleep. Not well. I lay in the Florence hotel and looked at the ceiling and thought about Laura, about the cruise, about the Coast Guard report. Conditions were severe, recovery not possible. Case closed. About 8 years of Walt and June Pearson. About the death certificate in my home office filing cabinet in Minneapolis, in the folder labeled Estate, L. Stephen, in the second drawer. If it's her, I thought, if it's somehow impossibly her, then she has been alive for 8 years. She has been in Italy for most of those 8 years. She has built a life and a family and a name. And Walt and June don't know their daughter is alive, and I have been taking care of them in her name. That thought, that specific particular thought, was the one that moved something in my chest from grief to something considerably sharper. I didn't let myself complete it. Not yet. Not until Salmento had something real. But it was there, waiting. There is a difference between suspecting something and knowing it. The suspicion is survivable. It has the softness of uncertainty around it, the possibility that you're wrong, the faint exit door of mistaken identity. The knowing is a different country entirely. You don't get to leave that one. Salmento called me on Wednesday morning, June 11th, at 7:45 a.m. I had been awake since 5. Phil and I had done the first 2 days of the structural assessment with the professional focus of people who understand that work continues regardless of personal weather. Phil, because that's how Phil is built, and me because the alternative was sitting in a hotel room in Florence waiting, and I have never in my life been good at waiting without something to do with my hands. But Wednesday morning I was not on a job site. I was sitting at the hotel room desk with coffee and my laptop and the 2 photographs still open on my phone when Sal called. Mr. Stephen, you should come to my office. What I have is better shown than described. Sal Mento's office was in a building off Via dei Serralli, a narrow street in the Oltrarno, 2 blocks from the piazza where I'd seen the woman Monday afternoon. The office was small and organized with the specific efficiency of a man who knows where everything is and has stopped caring whether it looks tidy by anyone else's standard. Filing cabinets, a large monitor, a map of the greater Florence metropolitan area with pins in it. Sal was 56, broad-shouldered and compact, with close-cropped gray hair and the watchful stillness of someone who has spent 34 years being paid to observe things that other people miss. He shook my hand, pointed me to the chair across from his desk, and opened a folder. I'm going to show you what I have in sequence, he said, because the sequence matters. First, a photograph. The woman from the piazza, taken yesterday from a distance. Better quality than mine. Full face, 3/4 profile. Clear enough. Then, a photograph from 8 years ago. A newspaper archive image. An American woman, identified in the caption as Laura Stephen of Minneapolis, Minnesota. A brief item from a Minneapolis Star-Tribune archive about a cruise ship incident in the Caribbean. A passenger missing, presumed lost at sea. Same face. Exactly. Unmistakably, I looked at both photographs on Sal's desk for a long time. How? I said. The background took longer than the face match, Sal said. The face I confirmed within 6 hours. Her current name is Elena Pearson Ferretti. She told Marco Ferretti when they met 8 years ago in Rome that she was an American who had left her previous life following a personal crisis. No details given. He didn't push, by his account, which I got secondhand from a mutual contact. He understood she had a difficult past and respected her privacy. She told him she was running from something, I said. Flat. Essentially, he believed it was a bad marriage. The room was very quiet for a moment. Sal let it be quiet. He was good at reading rooms. She faked her death, I said. I can't legally confirm that for you. What I can tell you is that the woman who goes by Elena Pearson Ferretti in Florence, Italy, has the same face as the woman reported missing from a cruise ship 8 years ago, uses the same surname, Pearson, as her maiden name, and has no documented history prior to approximately 8 years ago in any Italian or European registry I can access. No documented history, because she walked off a cruise ship in the Caribbean and walked into a new life and left me and Walt and June in Minneapolis filing a death certificate. The children, I said. 6 years old. Triplets. IVF, as I mentioned Monday. Marco Ferretti is on the birth certificates as father. 6 years old. She had been in Italy, building a new family for 2 years before the children arrived. She had been alive and in Europe while I drove Walt Pearson to his cardiology appointments and sat with June through her hip replacement. I looked at Sal. I need to know the mechanism, I said. How do you fake a death on a cruise ship? Sal leaned back. It's been done. Not commonly, but the documented cases exist. Rough water helps. Search and recovery becomes genuinely impossible, and the evidence standard for a presumed death ruling is lower when conditions make body recovery implausible. He paused. The Caribbean in March has weather patterns that can provide exactly those conditions, and most cruise ship disappearances are investigated at the level of, was this an accident or not? The investigation doesn't typically include, is this person still alive somewhere? She went overboard deliberately, I said. That would be my reconstruction, yes. With a plan on the other end, presumably Marco, or someone who became Marco, was already in place. I stood up, walked to Sal's window, looked at the Via dei Serragli below, Florence doing its morning thing, the particular ordinary texture of a city going about its life while I stood in an investigator's office above it, discovering that my wife was alive and had been alive for 8 years. Walt and June, I thought. They think their daughter is dead. They have been grieving their daughter for 8 years. June cried at Laura's birthday every year. Walt kept a photograph on his desk. Laura at 16, at a lake somewhere, laughing. He looked at it every day. She let them grieve her. That was the thought that turned something in me from shock to something that I am going to describe as cold clarity, because that is the most accurate description I have. Not rage, not yet. Cold clarity. What are my options? I asked without turning from the window. Legally, in the United States you have significant ones, Sal said. If she faked her death to end the marriage, insurance fraud if a policy was paid out, filing a false death record, potentially, and the marriage is legally still valid in Minnesota, which means her Italian marriage to Ferretti is bigamous. Was there a life insurance policy? Sal looked at his notes. Small one. 50,000. Paid to you approximately 11 months after the incident. I turned around, looked at him. I used that money for Walt and June's medical bills, June's hip surgeries. Sal looked at me for a moment. Something moved across his face that I recognized. He'd been doing this long enough to have seen most things, but something about this specific accounting had found a gap in his professional composure. Mr. Stephen, he said, I want to ask you something, and you don't have to answer. Ask, what do you want to happen? I sat in Sal's office for another hour. I called Donna Hicks in Minneapolis, my attorney who had handled Laura's estate, and who I had trusted with complicated things before. She answered at 2 a.m. Minneapolis time because I didn't check the time difference, and she answered anyway because Donna Hicks is that kind of attorney. Bob, sleep in her voice, but immediately alert. What's wrong? Laura is alive, I said. A silence long enough to have its own address. Bob, she's in Florence. She's been in Florence for 8 years. She has a husband and 3 children, and she faked her death on that cruise, and there was a $50,000 insurance payout that I spent on Walt and June's medical bills. I was looking at Sal's pinned map of Florence. I need to know everything I can do legally, all of it, every option. Donna was quiet for another moment. When she spoke, her voice had the specific controlled tone of an attorney who has been surprised by something and is already professionally functioning. Okay, she said. First, do not contact her. Do not confront her directly. Get everything documented before any contact happens. A pause. Is the investigator solid? Very. Good. Have him compile a full report. Photographs, timeline, the marriage records. Everything he can access. The insurance fraud alone is federal, Bob. The false death certificate is a felony in Minnesota. The bigamy is complicated because it's cross-jurisdictional, but it's not nothing. Another pause. And Bob, Walt and June, that's going to be, we need to think carefully about how. I know, Donna. I'll call you tomorrow at a reasonable hour. Call me whenever you need to. This is Bob. I'm sorry. I hung up, looked at Sal. The documentation, I said. How long to build a complete record? Give me 3 more days, Sal said. I want the marriage certificate, the birth records, photographs in context. The Italian records are accessible if you know where to look. He paused. There's one more thing. I didn't include it in the initial summary because I wanted to show you the core material first. Tell me. Sal turned to a second folder, opened it, placed a document in front of me. It was a photograph of a letter, handwritten, in English. The return address on the envelope, photographed separately, was a P.O. box in Rome, dated approximately 7 years ago, addressed to Walt and June Pearson, Edina, Minnesota. I found this through a contact who deals in estate document recovery, Sal said carefully. I won't explain the chain of custody in detail, but this letter was sent and never delivered. It was intercepted apparently before it reached your in-laws. By who, I can't say definitively. But the content, I read the letter. It was in Laura's handwriting. I knew her handwriting the way you know the sound of someone's voice. The loops. The specific way she formed the letter G. The letter said, Mom and Dad, I'm sorry. I'm alive. I needed to. I can't explain it all right now. Please don't look for me. I'll explain when I'm ready. I love you. L. 7 years ago. She had written to them. 7 years ago. 1 year after the cruise, 1 year into her Italian life, she had written a letter to her parents telling them she was alive. The letter never arrived. I didn't know it yet. Didn't know who had intercepted it, or why. Didn't know what the answer to that question was going to do to the story I thought I was already in the middle of. I didn't know that the most complicated part of what I was about to do wasn't going to be the law, or the confrontation, or even Walt and June. It was going to be what I found when I looked at that letter and asked a question I hadn't thought to ask yet. Why did she leave? If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you. For real. Now, let's finish this. I sat with that letter for a long time, in Sal's office, and then back at the hotel, and then over a dinner I barely tasted while Phil talked about the structural assessment and tried not to look at me too directly. Why did she leave? That question had not been available to me before Wednesday. Before Wednesday, the assumption had been, she died. The why of a death is grief, not investigation. But this wasn't an accident. This was a decision. Laura Stephen had stood on a cruise ship in rough Caribbean water in March, 14 years into a marriage, and made a decision to go into that water and not come back. And then she had surfaced somewhere else and built a new life. And 1 year later, she had written a letter to her parents telling them she was alive. And the letter had never arrived. Someone intercepted it, I thought. Someone between Laura's P.O. box in Rome and Walt and June's house in Edina. Someone who had reason to ensure that Walt and June Pearson never learned their daughter was alive, who had access to their mail. I thought about 8 years of showing up in Edina, of the house on their street, of the neighbors I knew by name, of the one person who had been consistently present, not as consistently as me, but present, in the years since Laura's death, who had expressed opinions about how Walt and June should be managing their affairs that I had never fully examined. I didn't want to finish that thought yet, not until I had something more than a thought. But it was there, the shape of it, and it changed the story I was in. The hardest conversations are never the ones you plan. The ones you plan you can prepare for. You know the terrain, you've rehearsed the geography, you've decided where you're going to stand. The hardest conversations are the ones that arrive when you're already in the middle of something else and have no time to arrange your face. I did not plan to confront Laura Stephen in Florence. I planned to document, file, and handle it from Minneapolis through attorneys and legal channels, and the clean machinery of consequence that operates better from a distance than from 30 feet away in a narrow Italian street. That was the plan. Then Sal called me on Thursday morning and said, "She's in the Boboli Gardens with the children. Ferretti's at a meeting until 3. If you want to be somewhere, she might be alone, or as alone as a woman with 3 6-year-olds can be. Today's the window." I sat with that for approximately 4 minutes. Then I put on my jacket and went to the Boboli Gardens. Thursday, June 12th, 11:15 a.m. The Boboli Gardens are behind the Pitti Palace on the south side of the Arno, terraced formal, the kind of green space that has been maintained by people who take maintenance seriously for 500 years. In June, in the morning, before the afternoon tourist wave, it has a quality of quiet that cities don't usually produce. I found her on a bench near the Upper Neptune fountain, watching all 3 children chase pigeons with the resigned attention of a parent, who has decided that pigeon chasing is an acceptable activity for the next 15 minutes. She was in jeans and a light jacket, the dark bob. Laura's posture, Laura's way of tilting her head. I sat down on the bench beside her. She didn't look at me immediately. Then she did. And the specific absolute stillness that came over her face was the confirmation that no photograph had yet provided in the same way. The stillness of a woman looking at a man she had left for dead 8 years ago. Bob, she said. Laura, I said. The children were still chasing pigeons, 3 6-year-olds, unaware. The fountain behind us, the Florence morning doing its indifferent, beautiful thing. How? She stopped, looked at the children, looked back at me. How long have you been here? Since Monday, I was here for work. I saw you in the piazza. I looked at her directly. I've spent 3 days with a private investigator confirming what my eyes already told me. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. Whatever she was feeling, and I was watching her face with the specific attention of a man who had spent 14 years learning to read it. It was complicated. Not simple guilt, not simple fear, something older and more knotted than either. I know, she said quietly. I know there's nothing I know what this looks like. Tell me why, I said, not angry. The cold clarity from Wednesday was still holding. Not the explanation, the reason, the actual reason. She looked at the children. One of the girls had caught a pigeon, apparently, and was holding it with the triumphant expression of a 6-year-old who has accomplished something significant. The pigeon was deeply unimpressed. I was going to die, Laura said. I waited. Not the way you think. I wasn't suicidal. I was diagnosed. Before the cruise. 3 weeks before. She kept her eyes on the children. Ovarian cancer. Stage 3. The prognosis, the doctor in Minneapolis told me there was a reasonable chance of treatment success, but the treatment itself was going to be, the word he used was brutal. And I sat with that for 3 weeks and She stopped. Gathered something. I couldn't do it. Not couldn't. I decided not to. I decided I didn't want the brutal treatment and the odds and the watching everyone I loved watch me go through it. My mother had done it. You know what June went through with her cancer in 2004, before we were married. I'd watched that. I decided I would rather disappear than put my family through that. So you staged your death, I said. I had a plan. I'd been thinking about it for 2 weeks. I'd met Marco at a conference 3 months earlier. We had been in contact. I called him from the ship and told him what I'd decided. He said he'd meet me in Rome. She paused. I know what that sounds like. It sounds like an affair, I said. It was. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. She looked at me finally. I'm sorry, Bob, for all of it. For what I did to you, and for what I did to my parents, and for the insurance, and all of it. I have been sorry for 8 years. Then why didn't you tell them? I asked. Your parents. You wrote them a letter 7 years ago. It never arrived. She stared at me. You know about the letter? Never delivered. Who had access to your parents' mail, Laura? Who was managing their household while I was taking care of the medical appointments? The silence that followed was very long. My cousin, she said quietly. Dana. Dana Pearson, Laura's cousin on Walt's side. I knew her, had known her for 14 years of marriage and 8 years of widowhood. A woman in her late 40s who lived 40 minutes from Walt and June, in Eden Prairie, who came around regularly, who had inserted herself into the management of Walt and June's affairs with the specific helpfulness of a person who expects helpfulness to be repaid. I had never liked Dana. I had attributed this to personality friction and let it go. Dana knew you were alive? I asked. No, she didn't know. But Dana managed my parents' mail for a period when my mother was recovering from her first surgery. She had access. And Dana? Laura stopped. Dana had always wanted to be the primary family. When I was alive, I was in the way of that. When I was dead, she intercepted the letter. I can't prove it. I can try. Something in her face that was, despite everything, still recognizable. The specific expression she made when she was about to say something she'd been carrying for a long time. My parents think I'm dead, she said. Bob, my mother is 75. My father has a heart condition. If they find out, I don't know what. Laura. I looked at her steadily. They have been grieving you for 8 years. June cried at your birthday every year. Walt has your photograph on his desk. He looks at it every day. I paused. They deserve to know their daughter is alive. Whatever it costs. The children were coming back now. The pigeon released. Attention redirected. 6-year-olds approaching with the energy of people who have successfully hunted and are ready for lunch. Mama, the boy, coming to her side, looking at me with the open assessment of a small child encountering a stranger. Chie, who is this? Laura looked at her son, then at me. E un vecchio amico, she said softly. An old friend. I flew back to Minneapolis on Sunday, June 15th. Sal's complete documentation was in my email. Photographs, records, the letter, the timeline, all of it organized into a file that Donna Hicks was already reviewing by the time my plane landed. Phil had come home 2 days earlier. He'd left on Friday morning with a handshake and the specific tact of a man who understands when something has moved beyond what a colleague can be present for. Donna met me at my office Monday morning, June 16th. We sat across from each other with coffee and the documentation and the long, careful discussion of a person who has been through something irrevocable and is now making decisions about what happens next. The insurance fraud is prosecutable, but the statute of limitations complicates it, Donna said. The false death certificate is a stronger case. That's a Minnesota felony with no expiration. The bigamy is valid but requires the marriage to be actively contested. She paused. What do you want to do, Bob? I had thought about nothing else for 6 days. 3 things, I said, in order. Tell me, first, Walt and June. I want to handle telling them personally before any legal process begins. They find out from me, not from a court filing or a news item. Donna nodded. Agreed. That's the right call. Second, Dana Pearson, I want the letter investigated. If she intercepted it, if she deliberately kept Walt and June from knowing their daughter was alive, I want that on record. I want consequences. That's possible. Male interference is federal. Third, I looked at Donna. I'm not interested in destroying Laura. I want the legal record corrected, the false death certificate, the estate closure, the insurance. I want it documented. But she has 3 6-year-old children and a husband who didn't know who she was when she married him, and I am not going to be the instrument of their family being completely dismantled because their mother ran from a cancer diagnosis and an end affair 16 years ago. Donna looked at me for a long moment. That's very measured, she said. I've had 6 days. What about you and her? The marriage is technically. I want a legal dissolution. Clean. On the record that she's alive and that the death was falsified, not a divorce in the conventional sense. A correction. The record reflecting the truth. And the in-laws' expenses. The medical bills I covered with the insurance money. I want that repaid. Not to me specifically. To Walt and June's care fund. As restitution. Donna wrote everything down. Looked up. Bob, can I ask you something personal? Sure. How are you? I thought about that. About the bench in the Bobley Gardens. About the child asking Chie and Laura saying an old friend. About the photograph on Walt's desk that I had looked at on 200 Adina visits and that had been, all along, a photograph of a living woman. I'm adjusting, I said. The grief I've been carrying for 8 years was real. The loss was real. The fact that the person isn't dead doesn't undo the experience of believing she was. I picked up the coffee. But I'm okay, Donna. I'm clearer than I've been in a long time, which is a strange thing to say about the week I found out my dead wife is alive in Italy. Donna almost smiled. It's a strange situation. Profoundly. I went to Walt and June's house in Adina on Wednesday, June 18th. I had called ahead and asked if I could come for dinner. June had said, of course, come at 6. She'd make something. The ordinary cadence of 8 years of showing up. I sat at their kitchen table, the same table where I'd had 100 dinners, where June's china cabinet was visible in the dining room, where Walt's medications were in the little organizer on the counter that I'd helped them set up. And I told them what I knew. I told them carefully, in sequence, starting with Florence and working forward and backward both. I gave them the documentation because Walt is an engineer's father and needs to see things on paper before they become real to him. I held June's hand when she started crying because there was no preparing for this, and there was no good way to do it, and holding her hand was the thing that was available. Walt didn't speak for a long time after I finished. He sat at his kitchen table looking at the photograph of Laura in the piazza that Sal had taken, the one that showed her face clearly, laughing at one of the children. His daughter's face. His daughter, alive, in Florence. She's really alive, he said. Yes. She's been alive the whole... Yes. June was holding the photograph now, looking at it the way people look at things they have needed for a long time. My baby, she said softly. Not angry. Not yet. Just the uncontrollable primary thing of a mother whose child is not dead. Walt looked at me across the table. 80 years old, Walt Pearson, with the face of a man who has just had 8 years of a particular geography removed from under him. What happens now? He asked. That's up to you, I said. And up to Laura. I've opened the door. What goes through it, that's between you and your daughter. Walt nodded slowly, looked at the table, then at me. 8 years, he said. You've been here for 8 years. After we thought she was. Yes, you didn't have to do that. Your family, Walt. That didn't change. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over mine briefly, the way old men show things they don't have words for, and then picked up his coffee. We're going to need your attorney's number, he said. We're going to want to contact Laura. I'll give it to you tonight. Laura and Walt and June spoke by video call. Donna arranged it and Sal facilitated from the Florence end. On Friday, June 20th. I was not present for that call. That was not my conversation to be in. What June told me afterward when I stopped by the Adina house on Saturday was that it had been hard and it had been real, and that Laura had cried for most of it, and that Walt had said very little except, at the end, "You're my daughter." That doesn't stop. June held my hand at the kitchen table on Saturday and said, she told us about the diagnosis, the cancer. Bob, she was so afraid. I know, I said. She should have told you. Yes, she should have. June looked at her hands. She came back to us because you went and found her. She would have let us keep thinking she was gone. She paused. You gave us our daughter back. I looked at this woman, 75 years old. 2 hip replacements. The pneumonia. 8 years of a grief that had been, it turned out, unnecessary, built on a choice her daughter had made in a moment of fear and run from ever since. I went to Florence for work, I said. She was just there. Bob. June looked at me directly. Don't do that. Don't minimize it. You found her. You documented it. You came home and you told us yourself because you knew we deserved to hear it from you. She squeezed my hand. That's who you are. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. Dana Pearson. The investigation into the intercepted letter took Donna Hicks and a federal mail examiner 6 weeks. The conclusion. Dana had, during the period she managed Walt and June's mail following June's first surgery, identified and withheld the letter from Rome. She had not destroyed it. She had kept it apparently the way some people keep leverage. And when Donna's investigator found it in a document box in Dana's Eden Prairie home during a consented search, it was still in its original envelope, unsealed, with Laura's handwriting on the front. Federal mail interference. Dana Pearson was charged, processed, and ultimately pled to a reduced count in exchange for a full account of her actions. The family chose not to pursue civil damages. What Walt said to Dana in private is not something I was present for, and not something he has described to me in detail. But Dana Pearson has not been to the Adina house since the investigation concluded, and Walt Pearson has not mentioned her name in my presence since. Laura's cancer, diagnosed 16 years ago, had resolved, discovered during a routine Italian medical exam 3 years into her Italian life, in remission, treated successfully abroad. She had been healthy for over a decade. She called me in August, the Minneapolis August, warm and clear, the lake visible from the back porch of the Lake Harriet Boulevard house. Bob. Laura. I know there isn't a version of sorry that... I know it doesn't cover what I... No, I said, it doesn't, but I hear it. A pause. My parents want me to come back for Christmas. To Minneapolis. To be there. That's between you and them. I wanted to know if that would... If you... Laura. I looked at the lake, August light on the water. Minneapolis doing its summer thing. I lived 8 years. It was a real life. Yours was too. We were married, and we weren't, and neither of those things completely cancels the other. I paused. Come to Minneapolis. See your parents. Let them have their daughter back. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me for that. The legal dissolution was finalized in September. Clean record. No contested proceedings. The insurance restitution went into a fund for Walt and June's ongoing care. Irrevocably. Documented real. On a Saturday in October, I drove to Adena and had lunch with Walt and June at the kitchen table. June had made soup. The real kind. Walt's photograph was still on his desk. He'd added a second one beside it. The photograph from Sal's surveillance. Laura in the Florentine piazza, laughing at her children. She looks happy, Walt said. She does, I said. You okay with that? I thought about the question. About everything it contained. Yeah, I said. Yeah, I think I am. Walt looked at me across the kitchen table, where I had sat for 8 years of someone else's grief and someone else's life and my own, which had turned out to be something I was still in the middle of, still building, still figuring out the shape of. Good, he said. Now eat your soup. I ate my soup. Outside, the Minneapolis October was doing what Minneapolis does, going golden and cold with the particular unapologetic honesty of a climate that has never tried to be something warmer than it is. Inside, the soup was good. And for the first time in 8 years, the house in Adena felt like exactly what it was. A kitchen table, 2 good people, and a man who had driven a lot of miles in a lot of weather, and was finally somewhere he'd actually meant to be. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.